Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. I do apologize about the camera angle. I'm actually charging my camera while I'm filming this video, so that's why the whole background looks slanted and on an angle. Please do not try to adjust your computer or television set. Just kidding on that. This is part 3 on my 1,500 subscriber Q&A. So we got asked a lot of great questions. I want to get into them. I will state this for those of you that have been asking. Part 4 of this series will have a lot of the personal questions that I've been asked in some of my other earlier videos. So if you never got an answer and you asked me something like, what type of car do I drive, or how long have I been active in coin collecting, all those questions will be answered in part 4. I just hope you don't hate me for some of the answers that are coming to those questions, because it's no holds barred. I didn't leave anything out. So if you asked me a specific personal question, even if it's more on the bizarre side, I will answer it in that series of videos. So getting right into this, we have a lot of ground to cover. We're going to start off with collectible video games, of course. Sean, how can I stay ahead of the curve on titles like Rule of Rose, Little Samson, and Panzer Dragoon Saga? Okay, everybody who collects video games at this point already knows that Rule of Rose, Little Samson, and Panzer Dragoon Saga are pretty much valuable on the secondary market. So at this point, that train has left the station. There's no secret to remaining ahead of the curve unless you want to go into the secondary market, you want to buy a copy of Rule of Rose or Panzer Dragoon Saga at present time, and you want to try your luck at hoping that that particular item goes up in value over the next couple of years. Now, I left out Little Samson of that equation for a reason. An item like Rule of Rose and Panzer Dragoon Saga, those particular games do have the potential to appreciate over the next 5 to 10 years. Now, I would be very doubtful that they're going to appreciate any more if we go 10, 20, 30 years out, because the market for a lot of these systems and a lot of these collectible games is going to be limited in the future due to digital distribution. However, a title like Rule of Rose, which is very controversial, I used to own a copy of it, and even Panzer Dragoon Saga, which really came out for the Sega Saturn towards the end of the system's life in limited quantities, and Sega has already said they don't have access to the master code for that game. Those particular games most likely will not get a re-release. So if you are confident in the market for those particular items, you can buy them, and possibly in the next 5 years or so, they will go up in value. I would not hold my hopes on that though, guys, because the Sega Saturn is an interesting niche market in video game collecting. A lot of people that are born in the year 2010, 2020, that are going to grow up and collect video games, they're not going to gravitate towards the Sega Saturn because Sega is no longer a prominent name in video game collecting and or video gaming in general. Let's be honest. Sega really hasn't done that much in the last few years. They're literally almost struggling financially. I hate to say it. Now, that being said, those games are iconic to the generations that grew up with them. Same thing is true with Little Samson. Little Samson came out as a late release Tato or Tato, you can correct me in the comments if I'm saying it wrong, Nintendo game, and as a result, it gained a cult following because the game is actually very fun to play. That being said, any investor who is going after video games and wants to try to invest in that market is probably going to go after a graded, near mint and complete copy of that game, or they're going to go after a factory sealed copy of that game. I've said this before. The prices of loose, quote unquote, rare games are going to come down over time for that particular reason. There is a inverse relationship with loose cartridges, meaning loose Nintendo games, and factory sealed games. If there's a speculative bubble in factory sealed games, that means those collectors that are going after all those high profile factory sealed water graded games at present time, not going after the loose cartridges, guys, with some exceptions. Stadium events, Nintendo World Championships, games of that iconic nature, yes, investors will go after. But an investor is not going to go after a loose copy of Little Samson in today's day and age. That's why the price of that, the price of Flintstones Dino Peak, has been dropping in value a little bit over the past couple of months to the past couple of years. So you got to be very careful in that market. So to answer your question, the market for these games and trying to stay ahead of the curve, the train has already left the station. And when we look at where the current video game collecting market is, meaning just looking at modern era video games with companies like Limited Run, Strictly Limited Games, Play Asia, that really reminds me of what happened back in the 90s with collectible comic books. When you had all these different variants of comic books that were coming out in the market with holofoil covers, variant covers, where people were trying to collect them all and they thought that they were going to invest in these items and they were going to be worth a ton of money in the future. Well, that market cratered. And that's really what I think is going to happen with a lot of these quote-unquote mass-produced scarce games that are coming out in the market where companies like Limited Run, and don't get me wrong, Limited Run makes a great product. I just spent $250 on games pre-ordered on their website over the last week because I love the products they produce. The difference is, I'm not trying to invest in these items. I'm buying them because I want to own them and play them. I don't care about the long-term future value of these items, which in my opinion is non-existent. Limited Run really hit a niche market and they ran with it and they succeeded as a result, and they deserve that success. The problem is the Timmy Poindexters who are coming into this market and buying up factory sealed copies of these games, thinking that because Limited Run only produced 5,000 copies, that item is automatically going to be as valuable as the next stadium events. That's completely ridiculous. These people do not know what they are doing. That's why I don't go on video game collecting forums anymore. There's too many speculators. There's too many people there that will say things that will trigger me. So it's best I avoid those sites. They don't want me on those sites either, because when I start talking finance and economics and why their theories don't hold water, what do you think happens? They end up banning me. So that's why I'm not active on any video game collecting sites at present time. I just get banned. It's not worth it. So let's answer your second question. The GameCube has seen dozens of titles shoot in the $100 plus tier in a matter of only 3 months. How could we have known to buy into the GameCube 6 months ago? In all actuality, if you would have done that, it would have been probably due to speculation and not true knowledge or investment. Nobody knows what a lot of these speculative markets are going to do at any given time. The GameCube, in my opinion, is one of the last great vintage Nintendo systems. The people that grew up with GameCube, you got to remember, GameCube came out, what, 2001, 2002? They're now in their 20s, in their late 20s in some cases. So they're going to want to go back and they're going to want to buy these games because unlike what's happening with present Nintendo games, like when we look at Xenoblade Chronicles, which Nintendo released for the Nintendo Wii, then released again for the new Nintendo 3DS, and are now releasing again for the Nintendo Switch, Nintendo didn't overproduce a lot of GameCube games for other systems. In fact, there's a lot of demand right now for Nintendo to reproduce Super Mario Sunshine and put it on the Nintendo Switch, or put it on the Nintendo 3DS, which isn't going to happen because the Nintendo 3DS is pretty much dead right now, thanks to the Switch. But back in the day, Nintendo did not re-release their games over and over again on different platforms. In fact, if you look at the Nintendo GameCube overall, very few games have been ported to other Nintendo systems. You have Twilight Princess, and you also have Luigi's Mansion, which just recently got a re-release on the Nintendo 3DS. But aside from that, few of those games ever got released again. I think Metroid Prime Trilogy, that came out for the Nintendo Wii. So we can also list that there. But most of those games really were underused. And Nintendo did pay a lot to develop those games for what that system sold as. That's why I keep telling you guys the Nintendo Wii U is not going to be a collectible system in the future. Too many of the games on the Nintendo Wii U have been ported to the Nintendo Switch, and more games from the Nintendo Wii U are going to be ported in the future. Your one element of surprise there is going to be Xenoblade Chronicles X, because I don't think that'll get its Nintendo Switch re-release, just due to the fact that it never sold that well, and the fact that Nintendo doesn't want to take the time and money it's going to take to convert a game like that to the Nintendo Switch. But they did convert Tokyo Mirage, which really surprised me. So that should give some of you hope. Hope that answers your question overall. Next topic. We're going to go to coins. Sean, I would like to hear your thoughts about the coin collecting market as it pertains to gold and silver coins, only due to the current market volatility we find ourselves in. So this is the thing about collectible investment grade rare coins. The market's very stable. The market's on fire when we're talking about coins that sell for thousands of dollars a piece on up, but that market is very sophisticated. You really have to know what you're doing to enter that market. I'm going to have videos that speak directly to this coming up on this channel in the next coming weeks. A lot of people are asking me about getting into coins because it is a market that is very versatile and it tends to weather a recession or an economic depression very well. However, I would not encourage anybody who doesn't understand the idiosyncrasies of the market to just jump in and start buying $3,000 plus coins through heritage auctions thinking that you are an investor. You really have to understand population reports. You have to understand how to grade coins. You have to understand what makes a coin valuable. You also have to understand CAC, Certified Acceptance Corporation, their role in the market, especially in present day. And you also really have to have a long-term time horizon. Coins are not something that you speculate on. If you go to the market and you pay $3,000 for a coin and you need cash and you want to sell it 6 months later, you could possibly take a loss on that item. Coins are long-term investments. And when I say long-term, I'm talking 10, 20, 30, 40 years on average. This is not a market that you just want to waddle into. There are a lot of multimillionaires and billionaires that diversify their assets through not only antiques and art, but also investment-grade coins. I know one particular individual who has a net worth of $10 million. $5 million of that person's net worth, which I think is way too much, is tied up in investment-grade rare coins. And most of these rare coins have a value of $50,000 to $100,000 each. It is insane how much money you can make in that market, provided you're already financially established, because you need to have the ability where you have multiple income streams coming in so you don't have to sell your coin collection at the wrong time. And that's why a lot of multimillionaires and billionaires are attracted to that particular segment of the market. Next question. Is the coin collecting market going higher, sideways, or getting hammered? Again, that's a very loaded question because there's different segments of the market. For instance, if you came to me and you said, Sean, I want to buy modern US Mint coins of a collectible nature. Well, that's a very speculative market. The US Mint pretty much releases markets to collectors who pay a premium for them. Then, depending on supply and demand, those particular items in question either drop in value or they go up a little bit in value, while speculators pretty much predominantly control that market. That's why I tell people to avoid the market for modern commemorative US Mint releases. That market is not equivalent to classic United States coins that were minted from the 1700s all the way up through the early 1900s. So let's talk about that market next. Now, let's say that you're thinking of getting in to the market for collectible rare coins that were minted by the US Mint, United States coins, from the late 1700s all the way up through the early 1900s. That market, if you're going after rare investment-grade coins, is on fire. There will always be demand in that market. I don't care what anybody says. I don't care if somebody comes in the comment section and says, Sean, I was at a coin convention last Tuesday in Buttmucksville, Illinois, and nobody was there. Therefore, the coin collectible marketplace is dying. Well, genius, what you don't realize is that most people who are getting into the investment grade side of the coin collecting marketplace, either they're going to the top tier coin shows across the nation, or they're staying home, logging on heritage auctions and Stacks and Bowers, and that's where they're buying their coins from. They're not going to a small coin convention in the middle of nowhere to buy a $5,000 coin. It's not happening. Most dealers at those type of conventions don't even carry inventory of coins in the several $1,000 range. Some do. There's exceptions to every rule. But most dealers that go to smaller coin shows have what I call collector grade coins. Coins that retail for $500 or less, that may be graded, sometimes they're not graded, that they just sell to passionate enthusiasts who are not looking to invest long term. So that's really what I say to that. So another market we really want to talk on really quick is the market for ancient coins. Ancient coins from the Roman, Greek, and Byzantine empires, those markets are on fire right now due to the fact that NGC Ancients, NGC Grading Company, now grades those particular coins. You have to be careful in that market though, because the market's not stable. The market's very speculative because NGC Ancients just came on the scene literally within the last few years. So the market hasn't had time to stabilize. It's like looking at the market for graded video games. Graded video games, the problem that I have with that market, the market's too speculative. It's not stable. Wada Games is too new, and the speculators that are coming into that market, they only see dollar signs. There's a lot of people that are lost in that market right now. Some people will make money. Others, though, a large portion of the people that are getting into Wada graded games, I've said this before, will lose money over the next 10 to 20 years. It's guaranteed almost. So you got to be very careful in a lot of these markets, in my opinion. So again, if you want to learn coins, I suggest you stick to classic US coins that were minted from the late 1700s all the way up to the early 1900s. And you only go after investment grade rare coins and you analyze the market in depth. And I will teach you how to do that in upcoming videos. Next question. This question's kind of funny, but I do want to answer it because I got this question a lot, ironically. So a couple of months back, I did a video where I showed you guys a collection of rare Native American antiquities, artifacts. And one of the artifacts that I had in my hand was a very somewhat valuable Native American arrowhead made of flint rock. And I had a glove on when I was showing it and holding it up to the camera. And somebody kept asking me this question, and this isn't the only person. I got asked this a lot. Why do you wear gloves to pick up a rock? It's a rock. It's been around for a million of years. Well, your hands automatically have oils and contaminants on them, or even if you touch something like this video game or even this graded Pokemon card, you are transferring the oils and contaminants from your skin to the item in question. So what you have to understand is certain items, especially if they're millions of years old, still have to be protected. Arrowheads are, believe it or not, graded by condition. So if I touch that arrowhead and get a fingerprint on that rock and it actually wears away part of that rock, if I would send that to get graded, and there is a company that grades rare Native American artifacts, more on that in an upcoming video, they could potentially deduct points simply because I handled that artifact inappropriately. That sounds a little bit bizarre, but anyway, we'll go with that. So that's why I wear a glove to handle those type of items. If we ever get to the point where I can do videos on gun collecting, believe it or not, I know some of you don't agree with my liberal political views, but ironically, I do collect guns, guys, and I have a gun in my collection that's worth $20,000. If I handle that gun, I always wear gloves. And every now and then, someone will say to me, like a friend who's not involved in the antiques and collectibles trade, or even a girlfriend, if I'm dating someone at that particular time, she'll say to me, Sean, you're handling a $20,000 gun that pretty much was used without gloves on when it was first produced. Why do you have to wear gloves now? Well, it's simple. I need to protect that particular item from the contaminants of my hand that can pretty much cause it to either rust or deteriorate or corrode over time just by touching that particular item. So you always want to wear gloves for a lot of this stuff. That's why I like graded collectibles. Graded collectibles, you can't touch the collectible inside, so you don't have to wear gloves when you handle them. Same thing's true with really video games. A lot of these out-of-box video games you really don't have to worry about. They're so old, they've been handled so many times. Me touching this Cosmic Chasm Vectrix cartridge isn't really going to affect the value overall. It's just something to talk about because I did get asked the question. Next question. So this is going to be on watches, Rolex and Patek Philippe. And if there's anybody watching from France, let me know how I did on that pronunciation of Patek Philippe. Paul Newman's Rolex watch was sold for a record price of $17.8 million in 2017. Just 2 years later, in 2019, Patek Philippe watch was sold for $31 million, which was the new highest record price achieved for a wristwatch at auction. There are now long waiting lists for new Rolex sports models at authorized dealers. These watches are not uncommon, but the premium of buying one in the secondary market to avoid waiting is in some cases quite high. Again, if you guys go back on this channel, I did a video on Hermes Birkin bags. And ironically, 90% of the viewers that watched that particular video were women, surprisingly enough. Or not surprisingly enough, I should say. Well, in that particular video, I used that as an example as to how high-end luxury good manufacturers are actually using mass-produced scarcity to their advantage to create products for the secondary market that do have value and tend to hold value over time. Hermes Birkin bags is a perfect example of that. Rolex, Patek Philippe, I'm sorry, I pronounced it wrong there, guys, forgive me. They do similar things, but the items aren't always as iconic as a Hermes Birkin bag. Hermes pretty much has that down pat. They know how many Birkin bags to release each year, each month, each quarter, and how to really stroke the fires of demand, where demand really overtakes supply to the point where people are paying a significant premium on auction sites like Heritage to buy one of those Birkin bags. Well, Rolex does do this to a certain extent with some of their watches. The best value, if you're going to buy a Rolex watch, is to go after a semi-vintage, authentic, all-original model in excellent condition or better. I really talk about this in one of the other videos that I did previously on this channel, and I've been dying to do another video on collectible watches because I think it would help a lot of my viewers out there, because I myself, I'm going to reveal something about myself that I'm not really proud of, but I'm going to state it. I own a Rolex watch. It sits in a safety deposit box, and I've literally worn it twice in my life. Do I ever advise anybody go out there and buy a Rolex watch as an investment? The answer is no. The reason why I have a Rolex watch is because I'm involved in the antiques and collectibles trade. I can afford to own at least one Rolex watch, and I also wanted to buy it because a lot of the work that I do in the antiques and collectibles trade is sometimes geared towards higher end collectors who own multiple Rolex watches. So of course, somebody who's active in that trade should also probably own one, so that I know pretty much how that collector feels when he interacts with his collection or looks at that particular watch from an investment standpoint. That being said, you have to be very careful when you enter these markets, because again, the market for Rolex watches and even other vintage watches like Patek Philippe, that's a very sophisticated market as well. If you buy a watch that was restored, or if the seller doesn't tell you everything about that watch and you buy it and you go to get it appraised, you can lose your proverbial ass in that particular market. So I'm going to be doing more videos on that. Just know that a Rolex watch, if you're going to go to any jewelry store and you're going to buy a Rolex watch and you're going to plunk down $10,000, $12,000, or even just $8,000 for a brand new watch, that really isn't the best use of money if you are going after a Rolex watch for investment potential. Just keep that in the back of your mind. So this person wants to know, where is the Rolex market for new sports model watches going in the future? I do think it is in a little bit of a bubble. I think there's a lot of people that made money in cryptocurrency, in the overall stock market, or there's people that just want to have status of being affiliated with a brand like Rolex that are entering that market, and they are paying a premium at present time for some of these treasures. So you really have to be careful. So to answer your question, yes, there is a bubble developing in that market, and unlike Hermes, who makes Birkin bags, Rolex doesn't have a good track record at limiting supply like Hermes does. It's a different market entirely. So be careful in that market. I will do more videos on that coming up. So let's go on to another two questions I'm going to take in this particular segment, then I'm going to end the video. The next question is, I would love to hear your take on social media being a hype machine and the long-term appeal of limited edition Air Jordans, Supreme, and the secondhand platforms like StockX being so popular. Well, I did a video on StockX and Nike Air sneaker collecting. It's actually in my playlist. If you go back about 3 to 4 months, you'll see that particular video. I do not like long-term investing in sneakers or clothing because a lot of those products are very hard to maintain. For instance, any Nike Air sneaker, if it is white, it will eventually start to yellow over time. This is something you have to realize. It's just like vintage toys. Vintage toys make a very bad long-term investment because they deteriorate over time. So you got to be careful in that market. Now, if you want to get into those markets and you want to speculate, a lot of people make a lot of money flipping Nike Air sneakers. Same thing's true with Supreme clothing and all those other high-end brands. But you really got to be careful because those markets are extremely speculative. Only on average, Nike Air is really the only market where it at least has legs, where there are people that won't take my advice and they will try to invest in that market long term. And I understand why. It's a great brand. It has a lot of appeal. Hell, I wear Nike Air sneakers almost constantly. I love Nike Air. I have a closet upstairs full of brand new Nike Air sneakers that I just switch on and off from. So I'm a huge fan of Nike. That being said, I don't consider it a valid long-term investment just due to the fact that the sneaker deteriorates over time, even if you keep it mint in the box. Just air in the elements getting to that particular sneaker will start to tarnish and corrode it just by design. So you got to be careful in that particular market. Last and final question for this Q&A series, we're going back to video games. What are your thoughts on vintage store display signs, lights, such as Nintendo, PlayStation, etc., for long-term holding? And I waited for this question towards the end of the video because most people don't watch these videos past 18 minutes, but I'm going to answer this in full. This is one of the best investments in the vintage video game market long-term if you know what you're doing. As long as you're not buying any of these fantasy pieces, any of these reproductions, if you're going after authentic World of Nintendo, vintage Nintendo advertising, and you are getting it in excellent or near mint condition or better, I sincerely believe that you have an excellent, valid, long-term investment in your portfolio. And the reason being, guys, is how many people back in the 1980s, even back in the early 1990s, were thinking, hey, I'm going to Toys R Us, I'm going to try to get them to sell me the Nintendo sign that's hanging above here that says World of Nintendo. Very few people had that mentality back then. It's the reason why, if I ever do a house tour, this house is actually accented in some very valuable pieces of vintage advertising from Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Moxie, 7-Up, and other soda brands. Well, ironically, nobody thought back in 1945 that a vintage Coca-Cola sign would be worth money in the future. Very few people had that thought in their head, so very few people saved those items. Well, today, there's Coke signs that I own that I could sell in the secondary market or consign to Morphy's auctions for $5,000 a piece. Now, most of those particular items are in off-site storage. I pretty much have the pieces displayed around my house that are in the $500, $1,000, $2,000 range or less for that particular reason. However, the market for authentic vintage video game advertising from the 1980s and the 1990s, don't go into the 2000s, in the 1980s and the 1990s does have legs, and it's going to be a very valid market going forward. And I know that probably shocks a lot of you guys for me saying that, but that was an item that the average consumer couldn't buy, hoard, and speculate on. As a result, because of what it represents, that market has legs and is very valid for long-term capital appreciation. Enough said. Hope you enjoyed the video. Part 4, we're going to be going into personal questions, and of course we will be getting back to talking about Lego, record collecting, all these other esoteric collecting categories that I haven't had time to do a video on over the last several weeks. Thank you all. Stay safe. Have a great night, and I will see you soon.